I can still taste the air of that morning, thick and sour, the kind that sits on your tongue like metal fear. Normandy was waking up under a pale, cold light, the mist hanging low over the hedgerows like ghosts reluctant to leave. The ground was soft from the rain that hadn't stopped in days, and every step made a wet sound that echoed louder than it should have. We were dug in just off the road to Caen, waiting for word to move, waiting for something, anything, to happen. That was the curse of those weeks, waiting, always listening for the sound that would decide who lived and who didn't. My rifle rested across my knees, my hands numb from the chill, my mind already wandering to thoughts I shouldn't have. Home, my mother's porch, the smell of her bread cooling on the counter. Then it came, faint at first, just a tremor in the soles of my boots, a vibration that grew heavier with each passing second. Murphy noticed it too. He gave me that nervous half grin of his, the one that said, "You feel that too, right?" The sound was unlike anything we'd heard before, low and steady, not the fast chug of a Sherman or the whining grind of a half-track, but something slower, deeper, almost like breathing. The fog began to shift, and through it, a silhouette emerged, massive, square, crawling forward, like some beast dragged from the earth itself. We both rose slightly, rifles forgotten, eyes fixed on the thing moving toward us. "What the hell is that?" Murphy muttered, and it wasn't just a question, it was a warning. The tank came into full view then, its armor glistening wet, its tracks biting into the mud without hesitation. It was a Churchill. I'd seen one before, but never like this. Behind it rolled an odd, squat trailer, armored and heavy, connected to the rear by a thick hose that looked alive in the dim light. Someone from the next squad whispered the name Crocodile, and for a moment we all laughed. Nervous laughed, the kind that keeps you human when everything else turns mechanical. None of us knew yet what it could do. We just stared as it lumbered closer, its turret turning with slow precision, scanning the tree line like it could smell fear. There was something unsettling about its silence between the growls of its engine, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the moment to unleash whatever secret it carried. When the first German position opened fire, we ducked by instinct. Tracers zipped overhead, carving orange lines through the fog, smacking into the dirt and stone around us. The Crocodile didn't flinch. It kept moving forward, deliberate, unstoppable, until it stopped just short of a bunker the Germans had built into the side of a small rise. We expected it to fire its gun, the usual thunder and recoil we knew by heart. But then something else happened. A hiss, like a giant serpent waking from sleep. The front of the turret lowered slightly, and then, hell opened. A jet of flame burst out, bright and roaring, pouring across the field like a living thing. The fire hit the bunker's opening and vanished inside, and for a heartbeat there was nothing. Then the world exploded in color. Orange and red licked up from the windows, black smoke curling skyward in thick, violent streams. The smell was immediate. Burning oil, wood, flesh, things you can't separate once they mix. The men who had been shouting in German seconds before weren't shouting anymore. Only the fire spoke. I felt my stomach twist, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with triumph, but with something darker. The Crocodile didn't stop. It sprayed the trench line next, sending flame crawling along the ground like some vengeful spirit, devouring everything it touched. I remember trying not to look, but you can't turn away from something like that. It burned its way into your mind, like an afterimage that refuses to fade. When the flames died down, what was left didn't look human anymore, just shapes, shadows, reminders. We'd seen death before, but not like this. This wasn't death from afar, clean and quick. This was personal. It made you question who the monster really was. The enemy in the bunker, or the machine that had just erased him from existence. The Crocodile backed away, its nozzle dripping fire that sizzled as it hit the mud. And for a moment it looked alive, almost proud of what it had done. None of us cheered. Nobody said a word. Even Murphy, who could joke through artillery barrages, just stood there with his mouth open, his face pale beneath the dirt. I think that was the moment we realized the war had changed. The Germans had tanks that could tear through ours, planes that screamed death from the clouds. But against this, against fire itself, they had no answer. We moved on behind it, following the scent of smoke and the uneasy quiet it left behind. Every step felt heavier. I tried not to think about the men who'd been inside that bunker, about the letters in their pockets or the families waiting for them somewhere across the continent. But war doesn't care who you think about. It just moves forward. And if you want to live, you move with it. Later that night, when we made camp near a ruined farmhouse, I caught a glimpse of the Crocodile parked under a broken oak. Its hull was blackened, streaked with soot, but it looked untouched, unbothered, as if the flames it unleashed never really left it. I lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, the sound of that fire still echoing in my head. Murphy had asked the right question. What the hell was that? Maybe it wasn't just a machine. Maybe it was the war itself, finally showing us its true face. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from right now? That night, the rain came back, quiet at first, tapping against our helmets like it was trying to wash the day away. I sat near the fire with my mess tin in hand, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. The flames of our campfire seemed almost obscene after what I'd seen earlier, harmless, small, gentle, and I kept catching myself staring at them too long, half expecting the crocodile to roll out of the darkness and remind me what real fire looked like. Murphy sat across from me, his face lit by the flicker, eyes hollow. None of us talked much that evening. The usual jokes, the crude banter, the talk of home, it was gone. War had a way of stealing things quietly, and that day it had stolen our words. Somewhere down the line, a radio cracked with static and brief orders about our next advance, but it felt distant, unreal. I remember looking up and seeing the crocodile parked under a sheet of camouflage netting, its bulk barely visible in the drizzle. It looked like it was sleeping, but even then I couldn't shake the feeling that it was dreaming of fire. The next morning, the mud had swallowed our boots again, and the smell of smoke still clung to everything, our clothes, our weapons, even our skin. The crocodile moved with us, always near, but never part of us, like a beast we'd chained and hoped we could control. The men began to talk about it in whispers, like it was a thing that could hear. Some swore it had a soul, others said it was cursed, forged from the sins of every man who'd ever burned another. One of the engineers who operated it told me that the flamethrower could reach over 100 yards, that the tank carried enough fuel to turn a field into a furnace 3 times over. He said it with pride, the kind of pride that comes from building something powerful, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't sleep well either. Machines weren't supposed to make you question your own humanity, but this one did. We reached a small village 2 days later, or what was left of it. The place had been shelled to rubble, half-standing walls, broken roofs, the smell of death buried under the rain. The locals had fled long before, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any noise. We found a dog still tied to a post in one of the yards, barking weakly, its fur matted with ash. Murphy cut it loose and gave it a piece of his ration, and for a moment, I saw something human flicker in him. Then the sergeant called us over, and that fleeting bit of mercy vanished. The crocodile was being positioned at the end of the street, its nozzle pointing toward a stone house where a German machine gun team had been holding out since dawn. The sound of its engine filled the air again, steady and cruel, and we all knew what was coming. We took cover behind a wall as it opened fire, the gout of flame pouring through the windows like liquid sunlight. The gunfire stopped instantly. The screams lasted longer. When it was over, the only sound was the drip of rain and the hiss of steam rising from the stone. The dog whined and ran. Afterward, Murphy and I were sent to clear the building. The air inside was thick, choking, and I had to pull my scarf over my mouth to breathe. The smell was indescribable. Smoke, burnt cloth, and something else you can't name because you don't want to. The bodies were barely bodies anymore, just outline. I remember stepping over a helmet that had melted into the floorboards, wondering if its owner had even had time to understand what was happening. Murphy didn't say a word. He just kept his eyes down, moving carefully, as if the ground might break under him. When we stepped back out, the rain had stopped, and sunlight was cutting through the clouds. I thought of how unfair that was, how the world kept turning, kept shining, even when everything inside you was still burning. That night, I wrote a letter home. I didn't mention the crocodile. I didn't mention what we'd seen. I wrote about the weather, the food, the men, lies, small ones, but necessary. How do you tell your mother that her son helped burn people alive? How do you explain that you didn't pull the trigger, but you still feel the heat on your face? I sat there with the paper on my knee, the pencil trembling in my, and I realized that maybe the worst part of war wasn't dying. Maybe it was surviving, and knowing exactly what you've survived. When I finally looked up, Murphy was watching the horizon, cigarette in hand, the glow of it, just a tiny flame in the darkness. You think they'll ever forgive us? He asked quietly. I didn't answer. The truth was, I didn't know who they were anymore. The Germans, the people back home, or ourselves. The crocodile slept nearby, a hulking shadow under the moonlight, and I could swear I heard the faint hiss of fuel inside it, like it was breathing. We would move again at dawn. More villages, more bunkers, more fire. The war was far from over, but part of me wondered if it would ever really end for men like us. Maybe some fires don't die when the war does. Maybe they stay lit, somewhere deep inside, waiting for the quiet moments to remind you of what you've done. If you've made it this far into the story, don't forget to subscribe, not just for more war tales, but to remember with me what these memories cost. We hit the outskirts of Hill 112 just before dawn, the kind of lightless hour when you can't tell if your eyes are open or closed. The night before, artillery had hammered the ridge until it looked like the moon. Craters, blackened trees, nothing left standing higher than a man's chest. Orders came down for us to push forward with armor at first light. The Crocodile was in front again, leading the column like some dark priest going to perform a ritual. I'd gotten used to the sound of its engine by then, that steady, deep growl that lived somewhere between a machine and an animal. It calmed me in a strange way, maybe because as long as it was moving, it meant we were still alive. The Germans had dug in hard on the ridge, and intelligence said they'd reinforced with at least 2 Pak-40s and a handful of machine gun nests. The kind of setup that could tear men apart in seconds. We moved low through the wet grass, rifles up, hearts hammering, breath fogging in the cold. The Crocodile stopped, turrets slowly turning, its hose trailing behind like a tail. I remember thinking how it looked alive when it moved, like it was sniffing the air for something to kill. Then the first shell hit. It screamed in from the tree line, slamming into the ground just ahead of us, showering mud and stone. The second hit closer, knocking me to my knees, ears ringing. Murphy yelled something I couldn't hear, pointing up the ridge. I caught sight of the muzzle flash, that quick orange blink that gives away the gun's position. The Crocodile turned toward it, slow but sure, while the Shermans behind us opened up. The air filled with the crack of 75s, the hiss of tracer rounds, the thump of mortars. I crawled to a fallen log, pressed myself against it, and prayed to whoever was listening that the Crocodile's armor would hold. It did more than hold, it advanced. The Germans kept firing, their rounds sparking off its hull, punching dents into the steel, but never stopping it. It reached the first trench line and paused. The hissing started, that same serpent sound that made your stomach twist because you knew what came next. Then the flame shot out, a roaring tongue that swept across the ridge like the wrath of something ancient. I saw the trench ignite, the figures inside turning to shadows that flailed and disappeared. The Crocodile moved on, sweeping the flame in arcs, the fire crawling up the hill, wrapping itself around gun pits and dugouts. The smell came down on the wind, burning oil, cordite, something human beneath it all. You never forget that smell. You can wash your clothes 100 times, but it clings to you, to your skin, to your memories. We pushed up behind it, rifles at the ready, boots slipping in the mud. A German popped up out of a foxhole 20 feet ahead, his uniform singed, screaming something I didn't understand. Murphy shot him before he finished the sentence. We passed him without looking down. The Crocodile roared again, this time targeting a bunker near the top. Its nozzle swung and spat fire into the narrow slit in the concrete. Inside, something detonated. Ammo, maybe. And the whole front blew outward in a storm of debris and smoke. The explosion knocked me backward, my helmet rolling off, ears ringing so loud it felt like silence. Through the haze, I saw movement. Shapes running from the trench, hands up, faces grey with ash. Surrendering. The Crocodile stopped. For a second, I thought that was it, that mercy still existed somewhere under all that steel and fire. But then another burst came from the tree line. MG-42, short and brutal. The German prisoners dropped mid-run, and the Crocodile answered without hesitation. The next jet of fire caught the machine gun position full on, and the flames rolled upward, swallowing the shooter and the nest alike. There was no more mercy after that, only fire, mud, and noise. By midday, the ridge was ours. What was left of it anyway? Smoke hung low, drifting between the shattered trees like ghosts looking for somewhere to rest. I walked up beside the Crocodile, its armor blackened and slick, the nozzle still smoking faintly. The crew sat inside, silent, faces unseen. I wondered what they thought when they pulled that trigger. Did they feel powerful, or did they just stop feeling altogether? Murphy came up beside me, took off his helmet, and wiped the mud from his face. "Hell of a thing," he said quietly. I nodded, though I didn't know if he meant the victory or the destruction. Later, when we set up perimeter near the ridge's crest, the Crocodile sat off to the side, its trailer dented but intact, looking almost peaceful in the fading light. The sun set red, like the sky was still burning. The wind carried the faint hiss of steam from the ground, where the fire had burned hottest. I sat there watching it, the way men watch campfires when they can't sleep, and I realized I wasn't afraid of dying anymore. I was afraid of what I'd become if I kept living through days like this. The Crocodile wasn't just a tank anymore, it was a mirror, and every time it opened its jaws, I saw more of myself inside them. We'd move again the next morning, push east toward the next line of resistance. The men cleaned their rifles, checked their gear, and laughed again like nothing had happened. But I saw their eyes in the dark, same as mine, wide and hollow. Maybe we all carried a little fire inside us by then, something we couldn't put out. The morning came with no sunrise, only smoke. It lay over the valley like a second skin, thick and grey, and when we breathed it in, it felt like we were swallowing ghosts. The order came down before breakfast. We were to advance east toward a fortified farmstead that had been holding up the entire company for 2 days. The Germans had turned it into a fortress, bunkers dug into the orchard, MGs in the attic, anti-tank guns in the barn. Our Crocodile was to lead again. No surprise there. When you have a weapon that makes the enemy run before the first shot, you keep it at the front, no matter what it costs the men who follow behind. Murphy was quiet that morning, checking his rifle in silence, eyes heavy, movements slow. I could tell he was somewhere else in his head, maybe still on the ridge, maybe trying to forget it. Me, I was just tired of mud, of fire, of pretending that we were still men. We moved out in a line, through the orchard's skeleton trees, our boots crunching frost and ash. The Crocodile rolled ahead, its tracks leaving deep scars in the earth. Halfway to the farm, we took fire, sudden, sharp, deadly. Bullets cracked through the branches, smacking into bark, mud, flesh. Someone screamed, someone else dropped. We hit the dirt and crawled for cover behind a low stone wall. The Crocodile kept moving, its armor ringing under the impact of incoming rounds. The commander's hatch opened just long enough for him to yell coordinates to the Shermans behind us, then snapped shut as a shell exploded nearby, showering the tank with dirt. The Crocodile didn't stop. It never did. It pushed forward through the fire, closer and closer to the barn. Then came that sound, that hiss, that warning, and a split second later, the world turned orange. The flamethrower's roar drowned out everything. It poured into the orchard, a wave of liquid fire rolling across the ground, climbing up the trees, setting the air itself alight. The barn went up like kindling, the roof collapsing in a rain of sparks. I saw figures running, men in grey, some still firing, others trying to flee. And then, I couldn't see them anymore. Just flame. The Crocodile swept its turrets slowly from side to side, methodical, merciless. The ground boiled where the fuel hit. The screaming mixed with the sound of the engine until you couldn't tell which was which. Murphy pulled me down as a burst of machine gun fire chewed through the wall above us, bits of stone cutting into my cheek. I felt the blood run warm down my neck, but I didn't care. I just stared at the fire, at the barn crumbling, at the silhouettes writhing inside it, and I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. We moved when the Crocodile stopped to reload, sprinting from crater to crater, shooting at shapes in the smoke. The Germans were falling back, some surrendering, some too far gone to care. The ground under us was soft, almost spongy, soaked with rain and fuel. When I slipped, my hands sank into mud that was still warm. I looked down and saw why. The remnants of a man's sleeve, burnt fabric fused to flesh. I jerked back and nearly vomited. Murphy grabbed my arm, hauled me up, shouted over the noise, "Keep moving!" I did, because that's all there was to do. You moved. You didn't think. You didn't feel. You just moved. By midday, the farmstead was gone. Nothing left but the shell of a house. The orchard burned to black sticks. The Crocodile sat in the yard, like a god that had finished judging the world. Steam rose from its armor, the metal shimmering in the heat. The crew climbed out, faces covered in soot, eyes blank. One of them lit a cigarette with hands that still trembled. I remember thinking they looked older than us, though most of them were barely 20. Maybe fire ages a man faster than time does. We set up a perimeter and waited for the order to push on. Murphy and I took a spot by what had once been a chicken coop. The ground there was scattered with feathers, scorched and dirty, floating through the smoke like snow. He sat down beside me, resting his rifle across his knees. "We're supposed to feel proud, right?" he said after a voice low. "For winning, for surviving." I looked at him, but he wasn't looking at me. He was watching the Crocodile, still leaking smoke from its nozzle, black trails curling into the grey sky. "You ever wonder," he continued, "if maybe we're not supposed to survive this at all?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He knew what I was thinking. We'd both seen too much. When dusk came, the light was strange, red, gold, the colour of dying fire. The Crocodile moved again, repositioning for the night, its tracks grinding over the wreckage, crushing everything beneath it. I watched it go, and for a moment I thought I saw faces in the reflection of its hull, not the enemy's, but ours. Hollow, burned, watching ourselves burn. They called the crocodile unstoppable. They said the Germans had no answer for it. Maybe that was true, but sometimes I wondered if we did, because every time it fired, it burned a little more of us too. Tell me something. If you were there, if you'd seen what I saw, could you still believe in mercy? Comment below. Maybe I couldn't either. It was the quiet after that haunted me most. The silence that came when the shooting stopped, when the shouting faded, when even the crocodile's engine went still. You'd think peace would sound like relief, but it didn't. It sounded like guilt, heavy and breathing in the corners of your mind. We stayed at that burned-out farm for 3 days, waiting for resupply, though I couldn't tell you why it took so long. Time didn't move right in. Day and night blurred together under that grey sky, and everything smelled the same. Smoke, oil, and the faint, sick sweetness of decay. I kept trying to write letters, but every time I started one, I'd stop halfway through. What was I supposed to say? Dear Mum, we won another patch of dirt. Some of us didn't make it, and the rest of us can't sleep. The paper stayed blank most nights, the pencil resting across my knees while I stared into the embers of what was left of the barn. Sometimes I thought I saw faces in those coals, faces of men who hadn't deserved to die like that, men who'd screamed in a language I didn't understand but whose meaning I'd never forget. Murphy didn't talk much anymore. He spent most of his time cleaning his rifle, over and over, even though there wasn't any dirt left to scrape off. He'd flinch every time the wind blew through the trees, like it was whispering. I asked him once what he thought about when he did that, and he just said, trying not to remember. I understood. Remembering was dangerous. Remembering meant feeling, and feeling was the one thing we couldn't afford. The crocodile stood nearby, under a tattered tarp, its armor streaked with ash and dried mud, its nozzle dark and cold. But I couldn't look at it without hearing that hiss, without seeing the fire light up the faces of the men it swallowed. It was strange. We owed our lives to that machine, and yet none of us could stand to be near it. The engineers treated it like something sacred, almost superstitious. They'd pat its armor like a priest, blessing an altar before battle. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was holy in its own way, a god of destruction, one that accepted fuel for prayer and flame for forgiveness. The nights were the hardest. You'd think exhaustion would bring sleep, but it didn't. The mind kept working even when the body gave up. I'd close my eyes and see fire behind them, stretching endlessly, and hear the faint, distant crackle that wasn't there. I'd see shadows moving inside that fire, not enemy soldiers, but people, men, boys. Sometimes I'd wake up gasping, my heart racing, my skin wet with sweat even though the air was cold. Once, I walked out into the field alone, just to breathe, just to feel something that wasn't the weight pressing down on my chest. The moon was out, thin and pale, lighting the blackened orchard like bones under skin. I could still see the outlines of where the bunkers had been, where the trenches twisted through the mud like scars. And in the middle of it, half buried in the earth, was a melted rifle. I don't know why, but I picked it up. It was still warm to the touch, as if it remembered. We got word that a new batch of replacements would be joining us soon. Fresh faces from England, boys barely out of school. They'd come marching in like we once did, full of questions, full of nerves, full of hope. I dreaded it, because they'd look at us, at the crocodile, at what we'd become, and they'd see their own future written there. The first time they saw that flame burst out, they'd cheer like we once did. They'd call it beautiful before they understood what beauty costs. And then they'd stop cheering, stop talking, start staring at nothing like the rest of us. That's how the war changed you, not all at once, but piece by piece, quietly, until you couldn't remember who you were before it started. One morning, I found Murphy sitting alone by the crocodile. He was talking to it, low and calm, like you talk to a dog or a dying friend. I didn't catch everything he said, but I heard him ask, "How many more?" And that was enough. Later that day, he went missing during patrol. They said he'd wandered too far into the woods and hit a mine. We never found much of him, just his helmet, crushed and blackened. The same day, the crocodile broke down. The crew said it was mechanical failure, something in the fuel line. I didn't believe it. Machines like that don't break. They stop because they've had enough. We buried what we could of Murphy near the orchard, marked the spot with a piece of wood from the barn. I didn't say anything during the burial. What was there to say? The only prayer I could think of was silence. That night, I sat beside his grave, and I could feel the crocodile watching me. I know it sounds crazy, but it felt alive, not in a mechanical way, but in a knowing way, like it understood. Maybe it was just my mind trying to make sense of too much death. too much noise. But I swear, for a moment, I thought I saw the faintest shimmer of light deep inside its barrel, like an ember that refused to die. And I realized then that fire doesn't disappear. It just moves from place to place, from man to man. Sometimes it's in your hands, sometimes it's in your eyes, sometimes it's what keeps you warm when everything else turns cold. After the war, they'd write about the crocodile like it was a hero. They'd call it a marvel of engineering, a symbol of British ingenuity, a terror weapon that broke enemy lines and saved Allied lives. They'd print its picture in books and show it rolling through the wreckage of Europe, black smoke trailing behind like a banner. But they wouldn't write about the smell. They wouldn't write about the men who couldn't sleep. They wouldn't write about Murphy, or the melted rifle, or the orchard that never grew again. History likes clean stories, victories you can celebrate. But war isn't clean. War is something you carry. It stays in the spaces between your ribs, in the quiet moments when the world feels too still. When I close my eyes now, I still see it. That long, low shape moving through the mist, breathing smoke, patient, unstoppable. And every time, I hear Murphy's voice, just a whisper behind me. What the hell is that? I don't answer anymore. I just watch as the crocodile disappears into the fog, knowing it's not going somewhere else. It's going deeper, into the parts of me I can never reach, into the places that still burn. When the war finally ended, I didn't feel anything. No joy, no relief, no sense of victory, just a hollow quiet that seemed louder than any explosion I'd ever heard. The papers said Europe was free again, that we'd saved the world from tyranny, but I couldn't see much of a world left to save. The fields were dead, the towns were rubble, the rivers carried more ashes than fish. We were sent home in groups, faces I barely recognized stepping onto ships that smelled of salt and sickness. I stood on the deck watching the shoreline fade, and it felt wrong, like leaving a graveyard without saying goodbye. The sea wind hit my face, sharp and clean, but even that couldn't wash the smoke from my memory. It was still there, under my skin, in my lungs, behind my eyes. When I got home, they called me a hero. The neighbors waved flags, kids ran beside the truck. My mother cried and held me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. I smiled because that's what they wanted to see. But when I closed my eyes, I saw fire behind her shoulder. I smelled the crocodile's breath. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake and hear it. The hiss, the roar, the muffled screams that never stopped, not even after I woke. Sometimes I'd smell burning, even when there was nothing burning at all. The doctor called it nerves, gave me pills that made the world soft and blurry. I stopped taking them after a week. I didn't want to forget. Forgetting felt like betrayal. Murphy didn't get to forget. The men who burned in those bunkers didn't either, so I lived with it. I tried working again, but every sound felt like war. The hammering of metal on the factory floor was machine gun fire. The hiss of steam pipes was fuel igniting. Even the church bells made my hands shake. They sounded too much like the alarm sirens in Normandy. People told me time would fix it. You'll heal, they said. You'll learn to move on. But how do you move on from something that's still inside you? You can't. You just carry it better. I'd walk down the street and see faces that looked like men I'd killed. Sometimes I'd see the crocodile too. Not really there, just a shadow in the corner of my mind. A dark shape rolling slow behind me, patient as always. I married a few years after. She was kind, gentle in a way that made me feel both safe and ashamed. She didn't ask much about the war. I think she knew not to. The first time I woke screaming, she held me until I stopped shaking, then just whispered, "You're home." But the word didn't mean what it used to. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was something we'd burned away a long time ago. Sometimes I'd sit outside at night and watch the glow of the refinery on the horizon, that constant orange flicker lighting the sky, and it made me sick because it reminded me of the flame. Yet I couldn't look away. There's a strange comfort in what hurts you most. It's familiar. It's yours. Years passed, and the world moved on like it always. They built new roads over the old battlefield, planted crops where men had fallen, put plaques where the fire once roared. The crocodile became a museum piece. Children climbed on its hull, laughing, their parents snapping pictures, calling it history. I went to see it once. I told my wife I just wanted to visit an exhibit, but it was more than that. I needed to see if it was still real. The museum was quiet, sunlight pouring through tall windows, and there it was, the same tank, its paint polished, its nozzle capped, harmless now. A plaque beneath it called it a symbol of Allied bravery and innovation. I stared at it for a long time. My reflection looked back at me in the steel, older, lined, eyes sunken. I reached out, touched the cold armor, and felt the faintest tremor in my hand. For a second I thought I heard it again. that low hiss, the whisper of flame waiting to be born. I stepped back. Nobody else noticed. To them, it was just a machine. To me, it was everything I'd lost, everything I'd become. After that, I stopped visiting. Some memories are better left behind glass. But the war never really left me. It followed in the small thing, the way I flinched when the stove lit, the way I froze when the power went out, and darkness fell too fast. My son once asked me what the worst part of the war was. I told him it was watching men die. That was a lie. The worst part was watching myself change, realizing I'd crossed a line I couldn't come back from, that there was a version of me buried out there under the ash, and no amount of peace would dig him up again. Now I'm an old man. The nights are quieter, but the fire's still there, somewhere deep. Sometimes I wake to the sound of rain, and for a moment I think it's Normandy. I can smell the wet earth, hear the tracks grinding through mud. And just before I open my eyes, I see it, the crocodile, moving slow through the fog, flame licking at its mouth. It doesn't scare me anymore. Maybe because I've carried it so long it's become part of me. Or maybe because I know it's just waiting. Fire always waits. It doesn't go out. It just hides, waiting for the next war, the next frightened boy with a rifle who thinks he's fighting for something pure. And when it finds him, it'll ask the same question Murphy did all those years ago. What the hell is that? And maybe he'll look at the fire, at the monster we made, and realize the truth I learned too late, that the answer was always us. The fire inside me burns lower now, not gone, just quieter, like coals that glow long after the wood has turned to ash. The doctors say my heart is weak, that I should rest more, that I shouldn't get worked up, but I don't think they understand that rest is the hardest thing to do. When the body slows down, the mind wakes up, and mine drifts backward like a boat with no anchor. The war feels closer these days than the faces in my photograph. I sit on the porch in the evenings, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the world that kept going. Kids laughing down the street, dogs barking, the distant hum of cars on asphalt. All of it sounds so alive, and I can't help but wonder how something as beautiful as peace can exist in the same world that gave us what we saw. Sometimes, the young men from the town stop by. They know I fought, though they don't really know what that means. They ask me if it was hard, if I was scared, if it felt heroic. I tell them the truth, that it wasn't like the movies, that courage isn't loud, it's just doing what you have to when you're too afraid to do anything else. They listen politely, their eyes flicking with the kind of curiosity that doesn't yet understand consequence. They talk about joining up, about service and pride, and I don't stop them. Every man has to learn his own way. But when they leave, I sit there and pray they never have to learn the things I did. At night, when the wind blows through the trees, it sounds like the sea again, and I think of Murphy. I see him the way he looked before the fear got to him, laughing, alive, with dirt on his face and that same half-smile that said the world couldn't break him. I like to imagine he made it home somewhere else, in some other version of the world where the fire didn't touch us. Sometimes I talk to him, quiet so the neighbors won't hear. I tell him about the town, about how the fields grew back where we thought nothing ever would, about the children who play in the park where they planted a memorial stone. I tell him I'm sorry. I don't know if he hears, but saying it feels like forgiveness. The crocodile still visits me in dreams, though not the way it used to. It doesn't roar or burn anymore. It just moves, slow and heavy, through the fog. There's no flame now, just light, soft, steady, golden. It's strange how the thing that once terrified me now feels like a companion. Maybe that's what time does. It turns monsters into memories, and memories into ghosts that follow you home, but no longer mean harm. I wake from those dreams calm, as if some part of me has made peace with the fire. People ask if I'd do it again, if I'd fight, if I'd follow the crocodile into battle, knowing what I know now. I think about that sometimes. I think about the faces of the men we saved, the towns that still stand because of what we did, and I think about the ones who burned because of it. There's no simple answer. War doesn't deal in clean choices. It deals in survival. We did what we had to. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it isn't. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you get from others. It's something you spend the rest of your life trying to give yourself. I don't fear death anymore. I've seen it too often to fear it. I just hope that when it comes, it's quiet. No fire, no noise, no metal, just quiet. Maybe then I'll find Murphy again. Maybe then the crocodile will rest too. Until then, I sit here with the evening sun warming my hand, watching the sky turn the same color it used to turn at the end of battle. That deep, bruised orange, fading into grey. The kind of color that reminds you everything burns out eventually, even war. If you've listened to this far, if you felt even a spark of what I carried, then do me one favor. Leave a like, share this story, and subscribe. Not for me, for the ones who didn't come back, for the men who burned, and for the boys who learned too late what victory really costs. Because remembering them is the only way to keep the fire from finding us again. The fire inside me burns lower now, not gone, just quieter, like coals that glow long after the wood has turned to. The doctors say my heart is weak, that I should rest more, that I shouldn't get worked up, but I don't think they understand that rest is the hardest thing to do. When the body slows down, the mind wakes up, and mind drifts backward, like a boat with no anchor. The war feels closer these days than the faces in my photograph. I sit on the porch in the evenings, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the world that kept going. Kids laughing down the street, dogs barking, the distant hum of cars on asphalt. All of it sounds so alive, and I can't help but wonder how something as beautiful as peace can exist in the same world that gave us what we saw. Sometimes the young men from the town stop by. They know I fought, though they don't really know what that means. They ask me if it was hard, if I was scared, if it felt heroic. I tell them the truth, that it wasn't like the movies, that courage isn't loud, it's just doing what you have to when you're too afraid to do anything else. They listen politely, their eyes flicking with the kind of curiosity that doesn't yet understand consequence. They talk about joining up, about service and pride, and I don't stop them. Every man has to learn his own way. But when they leave, I sit there and pray they never have to learn the things I... At night, when the wind blows through the trees, it sounds like the sea again, and I think of Murphy. I see him the way he looked before the fear got to him, laughing, alive, with dirt on his face, and that same half smile that said the world couldn't break him. I like to imagine he made it home somewhere else, in some other version of the world where the fire didn't touch her. Sometimes I talk to him, quiet so the neighbors won't hear. I tell him about the town, about how the fields grew back where we thought nothing ever would, about the children who play in the park where they planted a memorial stone. I tell him I'm sorry. I don't know if he hears, but saying it feels like forgiveness. The crocodile still visits me in dreams, though not the way it used to. It doesn't roar or burn anymore. It just moves, slow and heavy, through the fog. There's no flame now, just light, soft, steady, golden. It's strange how the thing that once terrified me now feels like a companion. Maybe that's what time does. It turns monsters into memories, and memories into ghosts that follow you home, but no longer mean harm. I wake from those dreams calm, as if some part of me has made peace with the fire. People ask if I'd do it again, if I'd fight, if I'd follow the crocodile into battle, knowing what I know now. I think about that sometimes. I think about the faces of the men we saved, the towns that still stand because of what we did, and I think about the ones who burned because of it. There's no simple answer. War doesn't deal in clean choices. It deals in survival. We did what we had to. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it isn't. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you get from others. It's something you spend the rest of your life trying to give yourself. I don't fear death anymore. I've seen it too often to fear it. I just hope that when it comes, it's quiet. No fire, no noise, no metal, just quiet. Maybe then I'll find Murphy again. Maybe then the crocodile will rest too. Until then, I sit here with the evening sun warming my hand, watching the sky turn the same color it used to turn at the end of battle. That deep, bruised orange, fading into grey. The kind of color that reminds you everything burns out eventually, even war. If you've listened to this far, if you felt even a spark of what I carried, then do me one favor. Leave a like, share this story, and subscribe. Not for me, for the ones who didn't come back, for the men who burned, and for the boys who learned too late what victory really cost. Because remembering them is the only way to keep the fire from finding us again.